the Westminster Larger Catechism on the Ten Commandments, starting with question 91, what is a duty which God requires of man? Answer: the duty which God requires of man is obedience to his revealed will. Question 92, what did God at first reveal in a man as a rule of his obedience? The rule of obedience revealed to Adam in the state of innocence, and to all mankind in him, besides a special command not to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was the moral law. Question 93. What is a moral law? Answer: the moral law is a declaration of the will of God to mankind, directing and binding everyone to personal, perfect, and perpetual conformity and obedience thereunto, in the frame and disposition of the whole man, soul, and body, and in performance of all those duties of holiness and righteousness which he owes to God and man, promising life upon the fulfilling and threatening death upon the breach of it. Question 94. Is there any use of the moral law to man since the fall? Answer: although no man since the fall can attain to righteousness and life by the moral law, yet there is great use of it, as well common to all men as peculiar either to the unregenerate or the regenerate. Question 95. Of what use is the moral law to all men? Answer: the moral law is of use to all men to inform them of the holy nature and will of God, and of their duty, binding them to walk accordingly, to convince them of their disability to keep it, and of the sinful pollution of their nature, hearts, and lives, to humble them in the sense of their sin and misery, and thereby help them to a clear sight of the need they have of Christ, and of the perfection of his obedience. Question 96. What particular use is there of the moral law to unregenerate men? Answer: the moral law is of use to unregenerate men to awaken their consciences to flee from wrath to come, and to drive them to Christ, or upon their continuance in the estate and way of sin, to leave them inexcusable, and under the curse thereof. Question 97. What special use is there of the moral law to the regenerate? Answer: although they are regenerate and believe in Christ, be delivered from the moral law as a covenant of works, so as thereby they are neither justified nor condemned. Yet, besides the general uses thereof common to them with all men, it is of special use to show them how much they are bound to Christ for his fulfilling it, and enduring the curse thereof in their stead, and for their good, and thereby to provoke them to more thankfulness, and to express the same in their greater care to conform themselves thereunto as a rule of their obedience. Question 98. Where is the moral law summarily comprehended? Answer: the moral law is summarily comprehended in the Ten Commandments, which were delivered by the voice of God upon Mount Sinai, and written by him in 2 tables of stone, and are recorded in the 20th chapter of Exodus. The 4 first commandments containing our duty to God, and the other 6 our duty to man. Question 99. What rules are to be observed for the right understanding of the 10 Commandments? Answer: for the right understanding of the 10 Commandments, these rules are to be observed: that the law is perfect, and binds everyone to full conformity in the whole man unto the righteousness thereof, and unto entire obedience forever, so as to require the utmost perfection of every duty, and to forbid the least degree of every sin; that it is spiritual, and so reaches the understanding, will, affections, and all other powers of the soul, as well as words, works, and gestures; that one and the same thing in divers respects is required or forbidden in several commandments. That is, where a duty is commanded, the contrary sin is forbidden, and where a sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. So where a promise is annexed, a contrary threatening is included, and where a threatening is the next, a contrary promise is included. That what God forbids is at no time to be done. What he commands is always our duty, and yet every particular duty is not to be done at all times. That under one sin or duty all of the same kind are forbidden or commanded, together with all the causes, means, occasions, and appearances thereof, and provocations thereunto. That what is forbidden or commanded to ourselves, we are bound according to our places to endeavor that it may be avoided, or performed by others according to the duty of their places. That in what is commanded to others, we are bound according to our places and callings to be helpful to them, and to take heed to partaking with others in what is forbidden them. Question 100. What special things are we to consider in the Ten Commandments? Answer. We are to consider in the Ten Commandments a preface, the substance of the commandments themselves, and several reasons annexed to some of them, the more to enforce them. Question 101. What is a preface to the Ten Commandments? Answer. The preface to the Ten Commandments is contained in these words: I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, wherein God manifests his sovereignty as being Jehovah, the eternal, immutable, and almighty God, having his being in and of himself, and given being to all of his words and works, and that he is a God in covenant, as with Israel of old, so with all his people, who, as he brought them out of their bondage in Egypt, so he delivers them from our spiritual thraldom, and that therefore we are bound to take him for our God alone, and to keep all his commandments. Question 102. What is the sum of the 4 commandments which contain our duty to God? Answer. The sum of the 4 commandments containing our duty to God is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, and with all our soul, and with all our strength, and with all our mind. Question 103. Which is the first commandment? Answer. The first commandment is, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Question 104. What are the duties required in the first commandment? Answer. The duties required in the first commandment are the knowing and acknowledging of God to be the only true God and our God, and to worship and glorify him accordingly by thinking, meditating, remembering, highly esteeming, honoring, adoring, choosing, loving, desiring, fearing of him, believing him, trusting, hoping, delighting, rejoicing in him, being zealous for him, calling upon him, giving all praise and thanks, and yielding all obedience and submission to him with the whole man, being careful in all things to please him, and sorrowful when in anything he is offended, and walking humbly with him. Question 105. What are the sins forbidden in the first commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the first commandment are atheism, in denying or not having a God; idolatry, in having or worshipping more gods than one, or any with or instead of the true God; the not having and avouching him for God and our God; the omission or neglect of anything due to him required in this commandment; ignorance, forgetfulness, misapprehensions, false opinions, unworthy and wicked thoughts of him, bold and curious searching into his secrets, all profaneness, hatred of God, self-love, self-seeking, and all other inordinate and immoderate setting of our mind, will, or affections upon other things, and taking them off from him in whole or in part; vain credulity, unbelief, heresy, misbelief, distrust, despair, incorrigibleness and insensibleness under judgments, hardness of heart, pride, presumption, carnal security, tempting of God, using unlawful means and trusting in lawful means, carnal delights and joys, corrupt, blind, and indiscreet zeal, lukewarmness and deadness in the things of God, estranging ourselves and apostatizing from God, praying or giving any religious worship to saints, angels, or any other creatures, all compacts and consulting with the devil and hearkening to his suggestions, making men the lords of our faith and conscience, slighting the despising God and his commands, resisting and grieving of his Spirit, discontent and impatient at his dispensations, charging him foolishly for the evils he inflicts on us, and ascribing the praise of any good we either are, have, or can do to fortune, idols, ourselves, or any other creature. Question 106. What are we specially taught by these words before me in the first commandment? Answer. These words, before me, or before my face, in the first commandment teach us that God, who sees all things, takes special notice of and is much displeased with the sin of having any other God, that so it may be an argument to dissuade from it and to aggravate it, as a most impudent provocation, is also to persuade us to do as in his sight, whatever we do in his service. Question 107. Which is the second commandment? Answer. The second commandment is, Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Question 108. What are the duties required in the second commandment? Answer. The duties required in the second commandment are the receiving, observing, and keeping pure and entire all such religious worship and ordinances as God has instituted in his word, particularly prayer and thanksgiving in the name of Christ, the reading, preaching, and hearing of the word, the administration and receiving of the sacraments, church government and discipline, the ministry and maintenance thereof, religious fasting, swearing by the name of God and vowing unto him, as also the disapproving, detesting, opposing all false worship, and according to each one's place and calling, removing it, and all monuments of idolatry. Question 109. What are the sins forbidden in the second commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the second commandment are all devising, counseling, commanding, using, and in any wise approving any religious worship not instituted by God himself, tolerating a false religion, to making any representation of God, of all or of any of the three persons, either inwardly in our mind or outwardly in any kind of image or likeness of any creature, whatsoever all worshipping of it or God in it or by it, the making of any representation of feigned deities, and all worship of them or service belonging to them, all superstitious devices corrupting the worship of God, adding to it, or taken from it, whether invented and taken up of ourselves or received by tradition from others, though under the title of antiquity, custom, devotion, good intent, or any other pretense. Whatsoever simony, sacrilege, all neglect, contempt, hindering and opposing the worship and ordinances which God has appointed. Question 110. What are the reasons annexed to the second commandment, the more to enforce it? Answer. The reasons annexed to the second commandment, the more to enforce it, contained in these words, For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments, are besides God's sovereignty over us and propriety in us, his fervent zeal for his own worship, and his revengeful indignation against all false worship, as being a spiritual whoredom, accounting the breakers of this commandment such as hate him and threatening to punish them unto divers generations, and esteeming the observers of it such as love him and keep his commandments, and promising mercy to them unto many generations. Question 111. Which is the third commandment? Answer. The third commandment is, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. Question 112. What is required in the third commandment? Answer. The third commandment requires that the name of God, his titles, attributes, ordinances, the word, sacraments, prayer, oaths, vows, lots, his works, and whatsoever else there is whereby he makes himself known, be holily and reverently used in thought, meditation, word, and writing, by an holy profession and answerable conversation, to the glory of God and the good of ourselves and others. Question 113. What are the sins forbidden in the third commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the third commandment are the not using of God's name as is required, any abuse of it in an ignorant, vain, irreverent, profane, superstitious, or wicked mentioning, or otherwise using his titles, attributes, ordinances, or works, by blasphemy, perjury, all sinful cursing, oaths, vows, and lots, violating of our oaths and vows, if lawful, and fulfilling them if of things unlawful, murmuring and quarreling at, curious prying into and misapplying of God's decrees and providences, misinterpreting, misapplying, or any way perverting a word, or any part of it, to profane jests, curious or unprofitable questions, vain janglings, or to maintaining of false doctrines, abusing it, the creatures, or anything contained under the name of God, to charms or sinful lusts and practices, the maligning, scorning, reviling, or any wise opposing of God's truth, grace, and ways, making provision of religion in hypocrisy or for sinister ends, being ashamed of it, or ashamed to it by unconformable, unwise, unfruitful, and offensive walking, or backsliding from it. Question 114. What reasons are annexed to the third commandment? Answers. The reason annexed to the third commandment in these words, the Lord thy God, and for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain, are because he is the Lord and our God. Therefore his name is not to be profaned or any way abused by us, especially because he will be so far from acquitting and sparing the transgressors of this commandment, as that he will not suffer them to escape his righteous judgment, albeit many such escape the censures and punishments of men. Question 115, which is the fourth commandment? Answer. The fourth commandment is, Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Question 116. What is required in the fourth commandment? Answer. The fourth commandment requires of all men the sanctifying, or keeping holy to God such times as he has appointed in his word, expressly 1 whole day in 7, which was the seventh from the beginning of the world to the resurrection of Christ, and the first day of the week ever since, and so to continue to the end of the world, which is the Christian Sabbath, and in the New Testament called the Lord's Day. Question 117. How is the Sabbath or the Lord's Day to be sanctified? Answer. The Sabbath or Lord's Day is to be sanctified by an holy resting all the day, not only from such works as are at all times sinful, but even from such worldly employments and recreations as are on other days lawful, and making it our delight to spend the whole time except so much of it is to be taken up in works of necessity and mercy, in the public and private exercises of God's worship. And to that end we are to prepare our hearts, and with such foresight, diligence, and moderation to dispose and seasonably dispatch our worldly business, that we may be the more free and fit for the duties of that day. Question 118. Why is the charge of keeping the Sabbath more especially directed to governors of families and other superiors? Answer. The charge of keeping the Sabbath is more especially directed to governors of families and other superiors because they are bound not only to keep it themselves, but to see that it be observed by all those that are under their charge, and because they are prone oft times to hinder them by employments of their own. Question 119. What are the sins forbidden in the fourth commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the fourth commandment are all omissions of the duties required, all careless, negligent, and unprofitable performing of them, and being weary of them, all profaning the day by idleness, and doing that which is in itself sinful, and by all needless works, words, and thoughts about our worldly employments and recreations. Question 120. What are the reasons annexed to the fourth commandment, the more to enforce it? Answer. The reasons annexed to the fourth commandment, the more to enforce it, are taken from the equity of it, God allowing us 6 days of 7 for our own affairs, and reserving but one for himself, in these words, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, from God's challenging a special propriety in that day. The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, from the example of God, who in 6 days made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. And from that blessing which God put upon that day, not only in sanctifying it to be a day for his service, but in ordaining it to be a means of blessing to us in our sanctifying it. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Question 121. Why is the word remember set in the beginning of the fourth commandment? Answer. The word remember is set in the beginning of the fourth commandment partly because of the great benefit of remembering it, we being thereby helped in our preparation to keep it, and in keeping it better to keep all the rest of the commandments, and to continue a thankful remembrance of the two great benefits of creation and redemption, which contain a short abridgment of religion, and partly because we are very ready to forget it, for that there is less light of nature for it, and yet it restrains our natural liberty in things at other times lawful, that it comes but once in 7 days, and many worldly businesses come between, and too often take off our minds from thinking of it, either to prepare for it or to sanctify it, and that Satan with his instruments much labor to blot out the glory and even the memory of it, to bring in all irreligion and impiety. Question 122. What is the sum of the 6 commandments which contain our duty to man? Answer. The sum of the 6 commandments which contain our duty to man is to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to do to others what we would have them do to us. Question 123. Which is the 5th commandment? Answer. The 5th commandment is, Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God gives thee. Question 124. Who are meant by father and mother in the 5th commandment? Answer. By father and mother in the 5th commandment are meant not only our natural parents, but all superiors in age and gifts, and especially such as by God's ordinance are over us in place of authority, whether in family, church, or commonwealth. Question 125. Why are superiors styled father and mother? Answer. Superiors are styled father and mother both to teach them in all duties towards their inferiors, like natural parents, to express love and tenderness to them, according to their several relations, and to work inferiors to a greater willingness and cheerfulness in performing their duties to their superiors, as to their parents. Question 126. What is the general scope of the 5th commandment? Answer. The general scope of the fifth commandment is the performance of those duties which we mutually owe in our several relations as inferiors, superiors, or equals. Question 127. What is the honor that inferiors owe to their superiors? Answer. The honor which inferiors owe to their superiors is all due reverence in heart, word, and behavior, prayer and thanksgiving for them, imitation of their virtues and graces, will in obedience to their lawful commands and counsels, due submission to their corrections, fidelity to defense and maintenance of their persons and authority, according to their several ranks, and the nature of their places, bearing with their infirmities and covering them in love, that so they may be an honor to them and to their government. Question 128. What are the sins of inferiors against their superiors? Answer. The sins of inferiors against their superiors are all neglect of the duties required towards them, envying at, contempt of, and rebellion against their persons and places and their lawful counsels, commands, and corrections, cursing, mocking, and all such refractory and scandalous carriage as proves a shame and dishonor to them and their government. Question 129. What is required of superiors towards their inferiors? Answer. It is required of superiors according to that power they receive from God and that relation wherein they stand to love, pray for, and bless their inferiors, to instruct, counsel, and admonish them, countenancing, commending, and rewarding such as do well, and discountenancing, reproving, and chastising such as do ill, protecting and providing for them all things necessary for soul and body, and by grave, wise, holy, and exemplary carriage to procure glory to God, honor to themselves, and so to preserve that authority which God has put upon them. Question 130. What are the sins of superiors? Answer. The sins of superiors are, besides the neglect of the duties required of them, an inordinate seeking of themselves, their own glory, ease, profit, or pleasure, commanding things unlawful or not in the power of inferiors to perform, counseling, encouraging, or favoring them in that which is evil, dissuading, discouraging, or discountenancing them in that which is good, correcting them unduly, careless exposing or leaving them to wrong, temptation, and danger, provoking them to wrath, or any way dishonoring themselves or lessening their authority by an unjust, indiscreet, rigorous, or remiss behavior. Question 131. What are the duties of equals? Answer. The duties of equals are to regard the dignity and worth of each other and give an honor to go one before another, and to rejoice in each other's gifts and advancement as their own. Question 132. What are the sins of equals? Answer. The sins of equals are, besides the neglect of the duties required, the undervaluing of the worth, envying the gifts, grieving at the advancement of prosperity one of another, and usurping preeminence over one another. Question 133. What is the reason annexed to the fifth commandment, the more to enforce it? Answer. The reason annexed to the fifth commandment in these words, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God gives thee, is an express promise of long life and prosperity as far as it shall serve for God's glory and their own good, to all such as keep this commandment. Question 134. Which is the sixth commandment? Answer. The sixth commandment is, thou shalt not kill. Question 135. What are the duties required in the sixth commandment? Answer. The duties required in the sixth commandment are all careful studies and lawful endeavors to preserve the life of ourselves and others by resisting all thoughts and purposes, subduing all passions, and avoiding all occasions, temptations, and practices which tend to the unjust taking the life of any, by just defense thereof against violence, patient bearing of the hand of God, quietness of mind, cheerfulness of spirit, a sober use of meat, drink, physic, sleep, labor, and recreations, by charitable thoughts, love, compassion, meekness, gentleness, kindness, peaceable, mild, and courteous speeches. In behavior, forbearance, readiness to be reconciled, patient bearing and forgiving of injuries, and requiting good for evil, comforting and succoring the distressed, and protecting and defending the innocent. Question 136. What are the sins forbidden in the sixth commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the sixth commandment are all taking away the life of ourselves or of others, except in case of public justice, lawful war, or necessary defense, the neglecting or withdrawing the lawful and necessary means of preservation of life, sinful anger, hatred, envy, desire of revenge, all excess of passions, distracting cares, immoderate use of meat, drink, labor, and recreations, provoking words, oppression, quarreling, striking, wounding, and whatsoever else tends to the destruction of the life, if any. Question 137. Which is the seventh commandment? Answer. The seventh commandment is, Thou shalt not commit adultery. Question 138. What are the duties required in the seventh commandment? Answer. The duties required in the seventh commandment are chastity in body, mind, affections, words, and behavior, and the preservation of it in ourselves and others, watchfulness over the eyes and all the senses, temperance, keeping of chaste company, modesty in apparel, marriage by those that have not the gift of continency, conjugal love and cohabitation, diligent labor in our callings, shunning all occasions of uncleanness, and resisting temptations thereunto. Question 139. What are the sins forbidden in the seventh commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the seventh commandment, besides the neglect of the duties required, are adultery, fornication, rape, incest, sodomy, and all unnatural lusts, all unclean imagination, thoughts, purposes, and affections, all corrupt or filthy communications or listening thereunto, wanton looks, impudent or light behavior, immodest apparel, prohibiting of lawful and dispensing with unlawful marriages, allowing, tolerating, keeping of stews and resorting to them, entangling vows of single life, undue delay of marriage, having more wives or husbands than one at the same time, unjust divorce or desertion, idleness, gluttony, drunkenness, unchaste company, lascivious songs, books, pictures, dancing, stage plays, and all other provocations to or acts of uncleanness, either in ourselves or others. Question 140, which is the eighth commandment? Answer. The eighth commandment is, Thou shalt not steal. Question 141, what are the duties required in the eighth commandment? Answer. The duties required in the eighth commandment are truth, faithfulness, and justice in contracts and commerce between man and man, rendering to everyone his due, restitution of goods unlawfully detained from the right owners thereof, giving and lending freely according to our abilities and the necessity of others, moderation of our judgments, wills, and affections concerning worldly goods, a provident care and study to get, keep, use, and dispose of the things which are necessary and convenient for the sustentation of our nature, and suitable to our condition, a lawful calling and diligence in it, frugality, avoiding unnecessary lawsuits and suretyship or other like engagements, and an endeavor by all just and lawful means to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of others, as well as our own. Question 142. What are the sins forbidden in the eighth commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the eighth commandment, besides the neglect of the duties required, are theft, robbery, man-stealing, and receiving anything that is stolen, fraudulent dealing, false weights and measures, removing landmarks, injustice and unfaithfulness in contracts between man and man, or in matters of trust, oppression, extortion, usury, bribery, vexatious lawsuits, unjust enclosures, and depopulations, engrossing commodities to enhance the price, unlawful callings, and all other unjust or sinful ways of taking or withholding from our neighbor what belongs to him, or of enriching ourselves, covetousness, inordinate prizing and affecting worldly goods, distrustful and distracting cares and studies in getting, keeping, and using them, envying at the prosperity of others, as likewise idleness, prodigality, wasteful gaming, and all other ways whereby we do unduly prejudice our own outward estate, and defrauding ourselves of the due use and comfort of that estate which God has given us. Question 143, which is the 9th commandment? Answer: the 9th commandment is, Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Question 144, what are the duties required in the 9th commandment? Answer: the duties required in the 9th commandment are the preserving and promoting of truth between man and man, and a good name of our neighbor as well as our own, appearing and standing for the truth and from the heart, sincerely, freely, clearly, and fully, speaking the truth and only the truth in manners of judgment and justice, and in all other things, whatsoever a charitable esteem of our neighbors, loving, desiring, and rejoicing in their good name, sorrowing for and covering of their infirmities, freely acknowledging of their gifts and graces, defending their innocency, a ready receiving of a good report, and unwillingness to admit of an evil report concerning them, discouraging talebearers, flatterers, and slanderers, love and care of our own good name, and defending it when need requires, keeping of lawful promises, studying and practicing of whatsoever things are true, honest, lovely, and of a good report. Question 145. What are the sins forbidden in the 9th commandment? Answer: the sins forbidden in the 9th commandment are all prejudicing the truth and the good name of our neighbors as well as our own, especially in public judicature, giving false evidence, suborning false witnesses, wittingly appearing and pleading for an evil cause, outfacing and overbearing the truth, passing unjust sentence, calling evil good and good evil, rewarding the wicked according to the work of the righteous, and the righteous according to the work of the wicked, forgery, concealing the truth, undue silence in a just cause, and holding our peace when iniquity calls for either approve from ourselves or complain to others, speaking the truth unseasonably or maliciously to a wrong end, or perverting it to a wrong meaning, or in doubtful and equivocal expressions to the prejudice of truth or justice, speaking untruth, lying, slandering, backbiting, detracting, talebearing, whispering, scoffing, reviling, rash, harsh, and partial, censoring, misconstructing intentions, words, and actions, flattering, vainglorious boasting, thinking or speaking too highly or too meanly of ourselves or others, denying the gifts and graces of God, aggravating smaller faults, hiding, excusing, or extenuating of sins when called to a free confession, unnecessary discovering of infirmities, raising false rumors, receiving and countenancing evil reports, and stopping our ears against just defense, evil suspicion, envying or grieving it to deserve credit, if any, endeavoring or desiring to impair it, rejoicing in their disgrace and infamy, scornful contempt, fond admiration, breach of lawful promises, neglecting such things as are of good report, and practicing or not avoiding ourselves, or not hindering what we can in others, such things as procure an ill name. Question 146, which is 10th commandment? Answer: the 10th commandment is, Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor his anything that is thy neighbor's. Question 147. What are the duties required in the 10th commandment? Answer: the duties required in the 10th commandment are such a full contentment with our own condition, and such a charitable frame of the whole soul toward our neighbor, is that all our inward motions and affections touching him tend unto and further all that is good, which is his. Question 148. What are the sins forbidden in the 10th commandment? Answer. The sins forbidden in the 10th commandment are discontentment with our own estate, envying and grieving at the good of our neighbor, together with all inordinate motions and affections to anything that is his. Question 149. Is any man able perfectly to keep the commandments of God? Answer. No man is able either of himself or by any grace received in this life perfectly to keep the commandments of God, but does daily break them in thought, word, and deed. Question 150. Are all transgressions of the law of God equally heinous in themselves and in the sight of God? Answer. All transgressions of the law of God are not equally heinous, but some sins in themselves and by reason of several aggravations are more heinous in the sight of God than others. Question 151. What are those aggravations that make some sins more heinous than others? Answer. Sins receive their aggravations from the persons offending if they be of riper age, greater experience or grace eminent for profession, gifts, place, office, guise to others, and whose example is likely to be followed by others. From the parties offended, if immediately against God, his attributes and worship, against Christ and his grace, the Holy Spirit, his witness and workings, against superiors, men of eminency, and such as we stand especially related and engaged unto, against any of the saints, particularly weak brethren, the souls of them or any other, and the common good of all or many. From the nature and quality of the offense, if it be against the express letter of the law, break many commandments, contain in it many sins, if not only conceived in the heart, but breaks forth in words and actions, scandalize others, and admit of no reparation. If against means, mercies, judgments, light of nature, conviction of conscience, public or private admonition, censures of the church, civil punishments, and our prayers, purposes, promises, vows, covenants, and engagements to God or men, if done deliberately, willfully, presumptuously, impudently, boastingly, maliciously, frequently, obstinately, with delight, continuance or relapsing after repentance, from circumstances of time and place, if on the Lord's day or other times of divine worship, or immediately before or after these, or other helps to prevent or remedy such miscarriages, if in public or in the presence of others, who are thereby likely to be provoked or defiled.